Welcome to this short presentation on understanding Hinduism. The goal of every Hindu is to find release from the cycle of birth and rebirth and be reunited with Brahman, the one supreme reality, the world soul. I come from a Christian family, but I grew up in a Hindu culture of India. Therefore, I can say that I am a Christian by faith, but Hindu by culture, because Hinduism is more than a religion, it is a culture, it is a way of life. So, my presentation today comes from my personal experience of Hinduism, my interaction with my beloved Hindu friends and neighbors with whom I grew up, as well as Indian Hindu scholars. Although Hinduism originates from India and is the dominant religion of this country, yet today Hindu communities are found in almost every part of our world, including Australia. According to Pew Research Center, as of 2015, there were about 1.1 billion Hindus around the world, representing 15.1% of the global population. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, in 2016, there were about 440,000, that is 1.9% of Hindus in Australia. According to the Hindu Council of Australia, currently there are 63 Hindu worship centers and temples in Australia. Therefore, it is important for Christians to learn more about this ancient religion and understand its way of life. This presentation will provide an introduction to Hinduism, focusing on some of its major and popular doctrines which will help Christians to relate to their Hindu neighbors and friends. What is Hinduism? The word Hinduism does not appear in any of the sacred literatures of India. It was mainly used by foreign invaders of India for the traditional socio-religious systems of the people of Hind or India. Hindus actually refer to their religion as Sanatan Dharma. Sanatan Dharma, the eternal path of right living. Sanatan means eternal and Dharma means religion. So it is the eternal path of right living. Therefore, Hinduism is a name given to the religious, cultural, social, political, and philosophical beliefs which make up the totality of the Hindu way of life. Hinduism has no single founder, no centrally organized priesthood, no fixed dogmas, no common creed. It is the most complex, diverse, and tolerant of the world religions. It has many different and inconsistent customs, traditions, and ritual practices which differ from place to place within India. We can find within Hinduism almost any form of religion, from simple animism to deep philosophical systems. It allows for the worship of the divine in all forms, gods and goddesses of every kind, with all possible human and animal representations. Hinduism accepts all religions. Therefore, it has a unique inbuilt ability to adapt itself to changing circumstances. Hinduism is like an umbrella. It has met the challenge of other religions primarily by absorbing them and their practices and beliefs into the mainstream of Hindu religious expression. It itself gave birth to many religions, including the Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. In a sense, it is not a defined religion, but an openness to spiritual experience. It teaches that truth is beyond names and forms, and all paths that lead to the divine are good. That is why, by nature, Hinduism is not a missionary religion. That leads us to another important question then. Who is a Hindu? Who is a Hindu? According to one of the sacred books, the Mahabharata, any person, regardless of their theological or philosophical convictions, can be a Hindu if they have no prejudice towards any creatures, including animals, in thought, deed, or word, and if they practice compassion and generosity towards them. So that is a Hindu. That is a Hindu person who has no prejudice towards any creatures, including animals, in thought, deed, or word. And if that person practices compassion and generosity towards all these creatures, then that person is a Hindu. Now, development of Hinduism. Very briefly, I'd like to share with you how Hinduism developed. This is a very short paragraph for us to know. Hinduism is a living religion which has evolved gradually over 7,000 years. It has its roots in the interrelationship of two basic religious systems. One is the ancient civilization residing in the Indus River Valley from 3000 BC, and the other one is the religious beliefs brought to India by the Aryan people. Possibly they came from Persia, who began infiltrating the Indus Valley sometime after 2000 BC. The Aryans absorbed the native Indian gods and concepts into their religion, and this integration resulted into a complicated array of gods and goddesses. So that is just a brief story about how Hinduism developed. I like to draw your attention to the important doctrines of Hinduism. Important doctrines of Hinduism. And first of all, we'll talk about the doctrine of God. First is Brahman, the Godhead. Hinduism teaches that there is one supreme, ultimate reality known as Brahman, or the world soul. This Brahman is inconceivable and therefore cannot be described in any way. It has no attributes. It is that from which every conceivable thing arises, by which things exist and into which everything is ultimately dissolved. Therefore, it cannot be object and subject of knowledge and worship. That is Brahman, the Godhead, the one supreme ultimate reality. Second, the Trimurti, or Trinity. As we have seen that the Brahman, or the supreme reality, is one and inconceivable. But in order to interact with the physical universe that is around us, this reality, this Brahman, takes on a personal form known as Ishwar. And this Ishwar then further manifests itself in a threefold form. The first one is Brahma. Brahma is the creator of the universe. The second one is Vishnu. Vishnu is the sustainer or preserver of the creation. And the third one is Shiva, destroyer or dissolver of the universe. Now these three, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, are not separate gods. Rather, they are the manifestations of the one supreme reality which we call Brahman. The third one is the avatars or the incarnations. One of the Hindu scriptures, Bhagavad Gita, says whenever there is a decline of dharma or religion or righteousness, then Brahman, Ishwar, incarnates itself for the protection of the good and for the destruction of the wicked, for the establishment of dharma. This Ishwar is born from age to age. In other words, whenever dharma or eternal order or righteousness or religion or law or duty, whenever that dharma is threatened, Vishnu, one of the three Murti, the preserver of the creation, travels from heaven to earth. And the purpose of incarnation is to re-establish the spiritual order in the universe by destroying the evil and rewarding the righteous. On this basis, all Hindus accept Jesus as one of the incarnations of Ishwar. But the problem arises when an attempt is made to limit the incarnation of Jesus in time and place to a single and unique event. Thus, Ishwar participates personally in the redemption of the world through voluntary incarnation. There have been 10 avatars or incarnations so far, and the popular ones are Rama, the 7th avatar, and Krishna, the 8th avatar, and Jesus, and so on. Therefore, all the gods of Hinduism are incarnations or manifestations of one Brahman, the world soul, the ultimate reality. So according to Hindus, Hinduism is not a polytheistic religion. Now it seems that there are two types of Hinduism. One is philosophical and one is practical. The followers of philosophical Hinduism direct their meditative practices to the impersonal, absolute aspect of Brahman, and they stress its transcendence and total lack of attributes. That is philosophical Hinduism. But for the followers of practical and popular Hinduism, everything, trees, stones, animals, rivers, sun, moon, everything is manifestation of Brahman, the world soul, the ultimate reality. Therefore, the followers of this practical or popular Hinduism have millions of gods and goddesses to worship. They have god of celibacy, goddess of education, goddess of wealth, and so on. So one may choose to worship one of these deities depending on a person's need without denying the importance of other gods and goddesses. So that was the doctrine of God. But the second one is doctrine of salvation. And under this doctrine of salvation, the first point is Atma. We like to talk about Atma. Atma, which is also called Jiv or Jivatma. the self, the soul in English. This Atma is an eternal, non-destroyable expression or mode of Brahman, the world soul. And this Atma is naturally immortal, having no beginning and no end to its being. However, somehow this Atma, this soul, this self experiences a fall from knowledge, and it becomes separated from the Brahman, the world soul, and loses its natural consciousness. Now, no one knows how and why this happens. It is the ultimate mystery. But somehow this Atma, this soul, separates itself from the world soul, the Brahman. And this Atma, this self, this soul, then begins its journey by devolving into the lowest forms of existence, such as plants, to regain the lost consciousness. And slowly, through a process of spiritual advancement, this Atma develops and matures, expanding its consciousness through the various lower forms of life, such as insects and animals. And this can be called the primary transmigration of the Atma, or the primary transmigration of the soul. According to tradition, this primary transmigration of this Atma through the lower life form takes about 8,400,000 births. So the Atma, the soul, has to go through the lower life forms for about 8,400,000 births. This is a natural and progressive process because these life forms, insects and animals, have no concept of right and wrong or the ability to make moral choices. So having gone through the lower life forms, now the Atma, the soul, finally reaches the human stage. This is called the secondary transmigration, which starts with the human birth. In this stage, every human being has concepts of right and wrong. Finally, the supreme goal of human existence, which is release from the continued cycle of births and deaths, is obtained. May I add that according to tradition, in this secondary transmigration, which is the human stage, from the lowest type of human birth to the birth in which spiritual awareness arises, one has to pass through approximately 100,000 births. So we see that there is primary transmigration, which is the lowest form of life, insects and animals, and then that Atma travels or journeys through the secondary transmigration, which is the human stage. The second point under this doctrine, this doctrine of salvation, is karma, the doctrine of karma. Karma is basically law of cause and effect. Related to the transmigration of Atma or soul is the doctrine of karma. The word karma means action or deeds, and it refers to the entire cycle of action and its consequences. Whatever we put out into the universe, we get back in equal measure. Whatever we sow, we reap. If we sow goodness, we will reap goodness. If we sow evil, we will reap evil. This law of karma operates whether we are aware of it or not. Karma is a law of nature. It is not established by anyone. It governs the universe and all beings residing within it. So the form of life which one is going to assume in a certain existence is determined by his or her own karma. In this life we experience the effect of our past actions. In this life we experience the effect of our past life, whatever we done in our past life. Everything a person does brings inevitable consequences and contributes to how the soul will be reincarnated in next life. So whatever we do now will bring inevitable consequences, and it will contribute to how our soul will be reincarnated in next life. That is, in brief, the doctrine of karma. But the third doctrine under the doctrine of salvation is punarjanma. Punarjanma literally means reincarnation. Reincarnation is the natural process of birth, death, and rebirth. At death, the Atma, the soul, leaves the physical body and continues evolving in the unseen worlds until it again enters into birth. Thus, the immortal soul inhabits many bodies in its evolutionary journey. After death, the soul continues to exist in unseen worlds, enjoying or suffering the harvest of earthly deeds until it comes time for yet another physical birth. And this cycle continues until the soul attains moksha. And so that leads us to the fourth point under the doctrine of salvation, which is the doctrine of moksha or mukti. Moksha literally means a release, escape, liberation, redemption, or in Christian terms, salvation. The release from the cycle of punarjanma, or the cycle of birth and rebirth, is the goal of every Hindu. The Hindu longs for this release. In other words, punarjanma is a burden for a Hindu and not fun. And so every Hindu longs for the release from the cycle of birth and rebirth. And in the end, after many reincarnations, the Atma, the soul or the self, will be liberated from its prison house and be reunited with Brahman, the world soul or the one reality. So Atma, the soul, will eventually, after many reincarnations, be united with Brahman, the world soul. So that is the doctrine of salvation in brief. So how do we achieve salvation? How do we achieve moksha? What are the ways of moksha? What are the ways of liberation? Traditionally, there are 4 ways to achieve moksha or salvation in Hinduism. The only way you can get out of this continued cycle of births and rebirths is by accumulating merit points, by doing the good karma. And so traditionally, as I said, there are 4 ways to achieve moksha or liberation. The first way to achieve moksha or liberation is called the karma marga, way of action. Karma marga, way of action. This karma marga is the way of work or action or the discipline of action. It means doing or performing one's duty according to one's place in life. This marga instructs the individual in performing those actions and developing those habits, both ritualistic and ethical, that will, by right action, tend to cancel out the effects of wrong action in this or previous lives. It talks about moksha by good works. That is why many Hindus emphasize good works, because they believe that if they do good work, then that will accumulate enough merit points. The second way of achieving moksha, or the second way of achieving salvation, is Jnana Marga, which is a way of knowledge. This is the discipline of knowledge. It provides a philosophical and psychological way of knowing the self and the universe. This way is generally chosen by the person who is interested in intellectual and contemplative areas. It believes that the great hindrance to moksha or liberation is ignorance of the true nature of the self. And this darkness of ignorance is dispelled through this way of knowledge. And then the individual soul becomes identical with the world soul or the eternal Brahman. That is the Jnana Marga, the way of knowledge, dispelling ignorance through this way, and then eventually the Atma joining the Brahman, the world soul, and that is through Jnana Marga. The third way of salvation or achieving moksha is called Bhakti Marga. Bhakti Marga, way of devotion. Now this way is a very popular way. This way is for the emotional people to attain moksha or salvation. This way encourages a loving and warm devotion to a personal god or goddess as the way to moksha, as the way to release. If the devotee surrenders himself completely to his god or goddess, he can overcome selfish desire, his ego, and when he gives everything, whatever he has, including himself, to that particular god or goddess, union between himself and that divine takes place, and that is called moksha. Moksha by way of devotion. The fourth way to achieve moksha, the fourth way to achieve salvation is called yoga. Yoga is a meditation technique. Yoga is another way of liberation or spiritual attainment. This spiritual attainment could be the unification of the isolated soul with the supreme of higher soul. This spiritual attainment could be the unification of the Atma with the Brahman, the soul with the world soul. This unification could be done by some practical methods. So for this union, purification of mind and emptiness of mind is required. This union between the Atma and the Brahman requires purification of mind and emptiness of mind. This can be achieved by meditation, breathing exercises, postures, and so on. So these are the four ways to achieve moksha. The other important doctrine we need to consider here is the doctrine of sin. In Christian faith, sin is basically defined as an offense against God. As Christians, we believe that all humans are born with original sin. However, there is no such a concept in Hinduism as original sin. Sin in Hinduism can be defined as any act that hinders one's Atma or soul from returning to the Brahman, the world soul. So any act that hinders the progress of one's Atma from returning to the world soul, the Brahman, that thing can be sin. One of the sacred books, Mahabharata, sums up sin this way. It says, those actions which cause hurt and suffering to any other living beings, whether they are animals or human beings, they are to be considered as pap or sin or demerit or unskillful action. And punya, the virtue, merit, skillful action, is defined as those actions which bring joy and happiness to others. So any actions that cause hurt and suffering to any other living being is called pap or sin. But any action that is good or noble and that helps other living beings is called punya. Any action that brings joy and happiness to other living beings is called punya. And so this was the brief doctrine of sin in Hinduism. I trust that you have been enriched by this brief introduction to this great ancient religion of the world. And I pray that this knowledge will help you to relate to your Hindu friends and neighbors. And of course, it will require you to go deeper if you like. It will require you to go to study more this ancient religion. But here I attempted to give you a really brief introduction that will help you in your interaction with your Hindu friends or neighbors. May God bless you this evening as you continue to serve Him. Thank you.